You are listening to Diasporic music on Black Power 96. Melinda Francis, Norman Richmond. Joining us on the line is Dr. Gerald Horne. Dr. Horne is the African historian who currently holds the John J. and Rebecca Morris Chair of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston. And his most recent book is Revolting Capital, Racism and Radicalism in Washington, D.C., 1900 to 2000. And Dr. Horne, how art thou?
It's all good. What about you all?
I have one word. Sam Cooke would say wonderful. Everybody else can speak for themselves.
Yeah, it's finally summer here. I'm very happy.
And we know Lisa's, I think Lisa's all right. Lisa's is always doing a good job on the buttons, keeping us sounding like we have some sense. I guess first, could you talk about the how is the book? How are the book launches going?
Well, the main one was in Washington. It was a fundraiser for the Pacifica affiliate there, and it was a successful fundraiser. I probably should mention the amount in case the tax people are listening. But suffice it to say that the folks at WPFW-FM in Washington were more than satisfied.
Or like Mississippi John Hurt would say, they were satisfied and tickled too, huh?
Absolutely.
Melinda, you want to kick off the questions?
Yeah. Do we want to just start right into it? Let's talk about Macron at BRICS and BRICS.
This is a very tricky question. It's not as simple or straightforward as it seems. The president of France has said he wants to be invited to the BRICS summit in South Africa in a few weeks. The BRICS, as you know, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, has developed as an alternative or challenger to the G7, led by the United States, Canada, Japan, and of course, Britain, France, Italy, Germany. Now, what's interesting is that, as my previous remarks suggest, France is a member of the G7, which is being challenged by the BRICS. So you may want to ask, what is his purpose in trying to wangle an invitation to the BRICS? Is it that he's going to be a spy or a saboteur or a kind of Trojan horse by showing up at the BRICS, seeking to sabotage this challenger? Or another way to look at it is to look at the history of France. Going back to the 16th century, France, a predominantly Catholic nation then, did not necessarily stand alongside its Catholic comrade, speaking of Spain, when it was being challenged by the Ottoman Turks. And recall as well that in the 20th century, France recognized the People's Republic of China well before the United States did. And there is perhaps a reason to suspect that France sees which way the wind is blowing, that it would like to be on the winning side, and therefore it may want to affiliate with the BRICS. Now, that may sound overly naive to some, overly optimistic from a certain point of view to others. But all I can say is that I would like to sit in on the meetings of the leadership of the BRICS, the leadership of South Africa, the Communist Party, and the African National Congress to see how they debate this question, because I don't think it merits a simple answer. What say you on diasporic music?
Go ahead, Melinda.
Well, I mean, I think I think he's doing the dance and seeing where he can land. That's my take on it. I don't know what you think, Norman.
Macron, I wouldn't trust him. I think he's an imperialist snake, and he's trying to siphon off information, and in the final analysis, he's going to go with his wing of the imperialist class, and I think he's going to look out for his sector of the ruling class, I shouldn't say the rule of the international ruling class. And I don't think he has the interests of Africa, the Caribbean, Asia, I don't even think he has the interests of the French working class at heart. He's not even concerned about his own workers. That's my stand on it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Well, and also I think like the interests of France on the continent would have, he would want to have a foot in to see what's going on. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, we'll see what happens.
Well, I agree. I know in terms of he's got his foot in the door. I mean, he could be like Gerald is saying, he could be a good spy for to get in there. He could eavesdrop or snoop, not Snoop Dogg, but he could snoop and see find out what India's thinking about, what China's thinking about, he would like to know what Ramaphosa of South Africa is talking about. And I think I think they should beware of Greeks bearing gifts. That's my position.
Mm-hmm. A Trojan horse, no less.
With ain't no doubt it. That's what I see. Next question. I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on Cornell West running for the president of the United States? And first, he dropped off from the People's Party, which I thought was a very good move. He's running as for the Green Party, and I've been following Cornell West for years and years and years. And I'm going to say this, and I'm going to shut up. I remember the first time I encountered Cornell West, we had a debate in front of about 2,000-3,000 people in Toronto. He attacked Cuba, and I attacked him for attacking Cuba. And then we kind of met afterwards and agreed to disagree. And at one point, he had a very weak position on Palestine and the whole Zionist question. He corrected that. He also is not as hard on Cuba as he used to be. But what are your thoughts on Cornell? You and Cornell West are like two straws in the Coke.
Well, I'm not sure if I go that far, but certainly I gave an interview with Sputnik Radio in Washington, so-called Russian-affiliated media, as it has been forced to bill itself, where I endorsed his candidacy. First of all, with regard to U.S. presidential elections, you can get the most votes and still lose, as Hillary Rodham Clinton in 2016 showed. And so this idea that he would draw votes away from the Democrats and turn the election over to Trump and the Republicans, I think misreads the way U.S. presidential elections are structured. They're basically 50 plus different elections. That is to say, we already know in 40 of these jurisdictions who's going to prevail. I vote in Texas. Republicans have a stranglehold in Texas. It's, as they say, the chance of a snowball in hell that Mr. Biden would win Texas. So are people telling me that we should not try to challenge the stranglehold of the reactionaries by any means necessary? And I think that Cornell running in Texas are running in Louisiana or Mississippi or Alabama or the Rocky Mountain states, Idaho, Montana, for example, Utah, we already know who's going to prevail. We need a different sort of challenge. And so I don't understand the notion that supposedly he's going to draw votes away from the Democrats, because the Democrats are not going to win those states. So it's fallacious thinking. I should say also that I know Cornell. We don't agree on everything, to put it mildly. But if you ask me if he's qualitatively superior to whoever will be the Democratic Party nominee, assuming at the moment that's Mr. Biden, well, it's obvious that he is. And so I'll stand by what I told Sputnik. I'll, in fact, reinforce it on Diasporic Music.
And I will withdraw my statement, my two straws in a Coke statement. I guess I was thinking about Bobby Lester and the Moonglows and Bob Marley. So it's Black Music Month, so I think I'm getting carried away. You have another question, Melinda?
Yes. Do we want to move? To? I know we've been kind of falling behind on South Africa and U.S.
Well, South Africa may be coming under U.S. sanctions, and I would like to warn the hotheads in Washington that they are going overboard with this idea of sanctions. I think. And as I told Sputnik News a few weeks ago, that it's like the overuse of antibiotics. That is to say, antibiotics, in a sense, are a miracle, that the way they deal with infections. But if you overuse them, then the target of that antibiotic is able to transform itself and basically render null and void the antibiotic. And I think that that's what's happening to sanctions. Look at Russia, for example. Russia is one of the most sanctioned nations on earth, yet its economic growth is outstripping that of Britain, which is one of the sanctioning nations. Now, why is the United States interested in sanctioning South Africa, you ask? Well, it has something to do with BRICS and its alliance and that formation with Moscow. It has something to do with South Africa refusing to go along with the sanctions crusade against Russia. It has something to do with the allegation, which we reported about on this program, that South Africa is supposedly sending military materiel to Russia, which has not been proven or validated. And interestingly enough, once again, a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, speaking of Gregory Meeks of Southeast Queens, is in the vanguard of waving the sanctions weapon in front of Pretoria. It's quite dangerous. And I should say in this context that we got a glimpse of the kind of arrogance that the European and North Atlantic nations use against Africa, because President Ramaphosa, accompanied by leaders from Egypt and Republic of the Congo, etc., is now in Eastern Europe pushing a peace plan. But what's interesting, they landed in Warsaw, Poland, were treated quite shabbily, quite disrespectfully for heads of state. They were not allowed to disembark from the plane for 9 hours, believe it or not. Their security was interrogated. This is not how you treat the head of state of a sovereign nation. Can you imagine President Biden being treated like that in Warsaw? It was a direct slap in the face of Africans. And of course, when they landed in Moscow to talk to Putin, they received an altogether different welcome. And so you can imagine what impact that's going to have on African-Russian relations versus African-Ukraine or African-Polish relations. So I think that Poland and its Ukrainian ally engaged in a manifest act of self-harm with regard to how they mistreated and maltreated President Ramaphosa and his comrades.
You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. We're talking to Dr. Gerald Horne, the author of a brand new book called Revolting Capital, Racism and Radicalism in Washington, D.C., 1900 to 2000. And we wanted to move on to talk about Mr. Henry Kissinger. He turned 100 years old. And how do you think, how should Africa oppressed people view Henry Kissinger? What is his legacy among African and oppressed people?
Well, as a war criminal, clearly. Recall that when Mr. Kissinger was serving at the highest levels in Washington, you had the U.S. collaboration with apartheid South Africa against the independence of Angola, which necessitated the dispatching of Cuban troops, which defeated ultimately the apartheid military, turning the tide against that rogue regime. Mr. Kissinger, if there was any justice, would be arrested, even at the age of 100 years old, and tried by an international tribunal for his various crimes against humanity. But I think that the reason we're discussing him today is that he is predicting conflict between China and the United States sooner rather than later. And I think, I'm afraid to say, that he may be accurate in that regard. The U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, is in China as we speak, the first visit by U.S. Secretary of State to China in 5 years. U.S. warplanes are buzzing Chinese planes in nearby Chinese territorial waters. The conflict probably will turn on Taiwan, the rebel island off the coast of China, which China claims as its own and which U.S. is arming so that it can become, in U.S. words, a porcupine, that is to say, able to send its needles and bristles into the flesh of the Chinese mainland. So it's a very serious crisis. And Henry Kissinger is largely responsible because in an act of desperation, this is my interpretation, as U.S. imperialism was reeling on the battlefields of Indochina, ultimately reeling as a result of unrest and revolution in Afghanistan, Iran, Grenada, Nicaragua, Southern Africa, etc. Mr. Kissinger brokered a deal with the People's Republic of China that got China to turn against the Soviet Union, which spelled doom for the Soviet Union, which collapsed in 1991. But the price paid was to build up the productive forces of China. And so now the United States wants to reverse that deal. And you'll get a glimpse of that this week, because guess who's coming to dinner in Washington this week? None other than Prime Minister Modi, Cool Modi from New Delhi. Because now the idea is to build up India to bring down China a peg. Already you see Apple trying to move its facilities from China to India. Already you see Germany collaborating with India in terms of a huge submarine deal. So I think it's possible to say that despite this maneuvering, the only question in the 21st century is who will ultimately undermine U.S. imperialism? Will it be China, or will it be a condominium involving India and its comrade going back a millennia or two to the formation of Buddhism, speaking of Japan? Those are the grim and glum choices for U.S. imperialism.
You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96 with Norman Richmond, Melinda Francis. We're speaking with Dr. Gerald Horne. And could you talk about the visit of the head of state of Iran, President Ibrahim? How do I pronounce his last name?
Raisi.
Raisi.
Yes, he landed in Havana a few days ago. This is part of a Latin American tour, also involving Nicaragua and Venezuela. And of course, the leaders of the Island of Freedom and Iran have much to discuss with regard to U.S. imperialism. Interestingly enough, Washington is scrambling right now to try to improve relations with Iran. Recall that under Mr. Trump, the nuclear negotiations between Iran and Washington were broken off. However, in light of the fact that China was able to broker an entente between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the ability of U.S. imperialism to encircle Iran was countervailed. Already, you still see articles about how Israel plans an attack on Iran because of the aforementioned nuclear capability that Iran purportedly controls. But I would warn the lunatics in Israel that they should think twice or thrice about such an adventurous, maniacal escapade. And certainly, in light of what we talked about previously, that is to say, China, supposedly, according to Washington at least, having some sort of eavesdropping facility in Cuba. Cuba, of course, denies that. But with Mr. Raisi in Cuba, the possibility, I'm sure, has occurred to Washington that relations, economic, diplomatic, political, military, and otherwise, between the Islamic Republic and Cuba could increase. And let me reference a footnote here, which is that Mr. Trump, who is facing prison because of failure to turn over documents to the U.S. National Archives, one of the documents apparently outlined the military vulnerabilities of U.S. imperialism. If you were to get a peek at that document, I think that you would find that one of the vulnerabilities was the U.S. relationship with its neighbor to the south, speaking of Cuba. And as a further footnote on that footnote, the speculation is that Mr. Trump was going to try to sell these documents to the real and imagined antagonists of U.S. imperialism, because, of course, he is interested in lining the pockets of himself and his family more so than protecting U.S. national security.
Yes, sir. Now, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has resigned after a mutiny in his party. And how should oppressed people see that?
Good riddance to bad rubbish. I mean, Mr. Johnson has been a disaster, not only for the poor and working class, but also for the ruling class. Britain's economic growth is tanking, as we mentioned a moment or two ago. And interestingly enough, during the same week that Mr. Johnson was forced out of Parliament, you had the indictment of President Trump and the death of Silvio Berlusconi, the neo-fascist former prime minister in Italy. And there was a kind of serendipity with regard to that trifecta, since all three of these men can be dubbed as either right-wing populists or neo-fascists. Their rise to power was bad news for progressive humanity, likewise, we can see that their recent setbacks are all a step forward for progressive humanity.
You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. We're talking to Dr. Gerald Horne. You have another question, Melinda?
Yeah. Let's go to Maduro in Saudi Arabia.
Well, that's part of the reshuffling of the chessboard. The Saudis obviously are no longer in the pocket of U.S. imperialism. The Saudis are applying for membership in the BRICS, for example, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and in fact may be accepted, at least on an observer basis, at this next BRICS summit in South Africa. President Maduro has broken out of the isolation to which he had been consigned, not only by U.S. imperialism, but by Canadian imperialism as well. Recall that he has met with President Macron of France, for example, in recent weeks, that he has met with President Lula of Brazil in recent weeks. Venezuela, as you know, has some of the largest oil reserves on planet Earth. With the boycott of Russian oil, it is hardly the major goal of U.S. imperialism to continue the boycott of Venezuelan oil because they have painted themselves into a corner by sanctioning Russia. So that's good news for Venezuela, and let's hope the good news continues.
Let me ask you this, Venezuela has had under Chavez and under Maduro has had a romance with Africans in America. Harry Belafonte, the late Harry Belafonte, Danny Glover, and others have gone to Venezuela, met with Mr. Chavez as well as Maduro. Now, how is the relationship between Africans in America and Venezuela? How do we see that? Is it a right-wing black Americans opposing Venezuela and progressive forces supporting them? Is that the case?
Generally speaking, once again, Gregory Meeks of the Congressional Black Caucus has not been a friend of Venezuela, but he is opposed by others. And, that's a very traditional sort of lineup, I'm afraid to say.
Yeah, Melinda, you have another question?
Do we want to talk about Bojo resigning?
Well, we did, but what I will mention is the president of Honduras has been spending about a week in China. This comes in the wake of Honduras breaking relations with Taiwan and restoring or initiating relations with the People's Republic. This is quite a long time to spend in one country. Usually when a leader visits another country, it's for 2 or 3 days at most. She's spending almost a week there. And it reminds me of other lengthy visits. I recall that during the reign of Salvador Allende in Chile, Fidel Castro spent 3 weeks in Chile. What's understandable given the fact that he was trying to give aid and counsel to the comrades in Chile, which of course they obviously needed since they were overthrown by 1973. Or recall that after the triumph of the Chinese Revolution, October 1st, 1949, Mao Zedong spent about a month in the Soviet Union. And that too was understandable. So one can expect further construction of Chinese facilities in Honduras, a further hysteria in Washington about Chinese incursions into the alleged backyard of U.S. imperialism due south in Honduras. So we'll have to keep our eye on that bilateral relationship.
Honduras, who is the most prominent Honduran that people would know about? Politically, musically, religiously. Honduras is I'm trying to think of the sister, the sprinter. She was from. I'm thinking about the world champion sprinter who got busted for, for the drug situation. She wasn't from Honduras, was she?
I know what you're talking about. I know Marion Jones because
she was. She's not Honduran, no.
She was from that vicinity, and I recall, she actually matriculated at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where I used to teach. I think she was even there when I was there, if I'm not mistaken. I haven't seen her name in the headlines of late. I don't know what happened to her.
I saw something about her ex-husband or one of her. Well, I think she was close to the Barbadian sprinter, and then she married another brother. But she had a relationship with I forgot the brother's name. He came in third in one of the Olympics. He was a great 100 meter man. Atto Bolton, him, and Maurice Green finished 1, 2, 3 in, I don't know, 96 Olympics maybe. But I know who you're talking about. We've only got 3 minutes left. Is there anything else you want to conclude with?
Well, I don't know.
Do we want to touch about Denver since we're in sports, like Denver over Miami?
Well, yes. The Denver Nuggets prevailed over the Miami Heat, which was wholly expected. And the Denver center, who is of Serbian descent, Nikola Jokic, or the Joker, as he is called colloquially, led the playoffs in rebounds, points, and assists, the first time that's ever happened. And he is now, I'm sure, back in his home in Belgrade. He is not as politically forward, shall we say, or vocal as his fellow Serbian athlete, Novak Djokovic, the tennis star who just won the French Open. The Joker is much more circumspect than Djokovic, for whatever reason, for example.
Well, the Serbians, I guess he would be under a pressure from, I guess, the right wing, basically not to come out against U.S. or any kind of imperialism, wouldn't he?
Well, of course, but that obviously has not restrained Novak Djokovic, for example, who is very outspoken with regard to his Serbian nationalism. But of course, I mean, that we shouldn't expect all Serbians to think alike, like we don't expect all Canadians to think alike, for example.
I think we have exhausted. Go ahead, Melinda. I'm sorry.
Well, I don't know if we can touch base. This has been on the deck for a while. Vince C.S. Jr., the poor player in Madrid over the racism.
Well, racism in sports is getting more intense. I'm not sure if it's a product of the growth of neo-fascism in the North Atlantic bloc, or its intensification of pre-existing trends, this very toxic form of race, class, resentment that you see when there is the rising of Black folk, not least Black men who seem to have wealth and income, which is the case for many professional athletes. You've had Professional tennis players also complain about the way they're maltreated and mistreated as well. So this is an ongoing problem that we should not overlook.
And with that, I think that brings us to the conclusion, my comrade.
All right, good luck to you.
And I would like to thank Melinda Francis, Mali Docuvixen, for co-producing and hosting the show today. And I would also like to thank Lisa Watson for keeping us in cyberspace and in on the worldwide internet. And I guess we will see you